Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Lunning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and today we'll be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's classic, the Screwtape Letters. This is a HarperCollins hardcover of the book. It's not part of the Sea Harp catalog, but we do have some great Lewis content right here on the YouTube channel, or if you'd prefer to read, you can read his foreword to Athanasius's On the Incarnation, which is part of our Timeless series. Today we will be looking at letter number 14, and so let's dive right in. My dear Wormwood, the most alarming thing in your last account of the patient is that he is making none of those confident resolutions which marked his original conversion. No more lavish promises of perpetual virtue, I gather. Not even the expectation of an endowment of grace for life, but only a hope for the daily and hourly pittance to meet the daily and hourly temptation. This is very bad. I see only one thing to do at the moment. Your patient has become humble. Have you drawn his attention to the fact? All virtues are less formidable to us once the man is aware that he has them. But this is especially true of humility. Catch him at the moment when he is really poor in spirit and smuggle into his mind the gratifying reflection, by Jove, I'm being humble. And almost immediately, pride at his own humility will appear. If he awakes to the danger and tries to smother this new form of pride, make him proud of his attempt. And so on, through as many stages as you please. But don't try this too long, for fear you awake his sense of humor and proportion, in which case he will merely laugh at you and go to bed. As we open this letter, we're delving back into something we talked about either in the last letter or 2 letters ago. The idea that in our moments of spiritual exaltation, we often become great egoists, like focused totally on the self. But whenever I have the inclination, this is just a little hot tip from Eugene, whenever I feel the inclination to get prideful, I always go back to a quotation I read years ago. It's in the book Out of Africa by the writer Isaac Dinesen. And she, the Baroness von Blixen is actually her name, she says this. She says, real pride like self-confidence, the way that God intends it, pride is belief in the idea God had when he made you. So whenever I have that inward sinful temptation to think, boy, I'm better than other people, I go back to that quotation. Real true pride is belief in the idea that God had when he made me. What did he make me to do? What did he make you to do? It's as we approach toward that identity, as we go to him and say, Lord Jesus, why did you make me this way, with these particular interests, perhaps even these talents or strengths? And we're reminded that they are entirely built for his purposes, to honor him, to show others his love. Because as we remember the self-identity he has inputted into us, well, then we're not so prideful about it. It was given to us. It's a joy to bear it and to use it for his purposes. I like this idea up at the top here, very first couple sentences. It says that the patient has a hope for the daily and hourly. It's as we go to the daily and hourly, like the infinitesimal, like the momentary experience day by day by day that we have of Jesus, that we get a little bit less excited about ourselves. And boy, do I like the ending there. To have an awakened sense of humor and proportion. Friends, we are funny little people. We do not know what we're doing, and the quicker we get to that realization day by day by day, the less prideful we are, and the more we have just a smile on our lips as we encounter all the other people around us going about their own prideful struggles. So let's continue reading. But there are other profitable ways of fixing his attention on the virtue of humility. By this virtue, as by all the others, our enemy, meaning God, wants to turn the man's attention away from self to him and to the man's neighbors. All the abjection and self-hatred are designed in the long run solely for this end. Unless they attain this end, they do us little harm, and they may even do us good if they keep the man concerned with himself. And above all, if self-contempt can be made the starting point for contempt of other selves, and thus for gloom, cynicism, and cruelty. And I'll pause again. That's why I love Isak Dinneson's definition of like a proper pride or self-confidence. Because if we remember that we are made the way we've been made for God's purposes, and that it was like in his mind before we even existed, then we don't degrade ourselves. It doesn't turn into a self-hatred that's sort of like whipping itself with these ways that we just, oh, we're so fallen, so short. We're only sinners. We're nothing. We're no good. He wants us to see ourselves as he sees us. And he wants us to see our usefulness as he sees it. That's why when we get self-hatred, self-contempt going on, we end up having contempt for other people. But if we honor the creation that we are in his sight, it's so much easier for us to turn around and honor others. And it makes life kind of like this subtle joy. I'll continue. You must, therefore, conceal from the patient the true end of humility. Let him think of it not as self-forgetfulness, but as a certain kind of opinion, namely a low opinion, of his own talents and character. Some talents, I gather, he really has. Fix in his mind the idea that humility consists in trying to believe those talents to be less valuable than he believes them to be. No doubt, they are in fact less valuable than he believes, but that is not the point. The great thing is to make him value an opinion for some quality other than truth, thus introducing an element of dishonesty and make-believe into the heart of what otherwise threatens to become a virtue. By this method, thousands of humans have been brought to think that humility means pretty women trying to believe they are ugly and clever men trying to believe they are fools. And since what they are trying to believe may, in some cases, be manifest nonsense, they cannot succeed in believing it, and we have the chance of keeping their minds endlessly revolving on themselves in an effort to achieve the impossible. To anticipate the enemy's strategy, meaning God's strategy, we must consider his aims. The enemy wants to bring the man to a state of mind in which he could design the best cathedral in the world and know it to be the best and rejoice in the fact without being any more or less or otherwise glad at having done it than he would be if it had been done by another. The enemy wants him, in the end, to be so free from any bias in his own favor that he can rejoice in his own talents as frankly and gratefully as in his neighbor's talents, or in a sunrise, an elephant, or a waterfall. He wants each man, again, this is God, he wants each man in the long run to be able to recognize all creatures, even himself, as glorious and excellent things. He wants to kill their animal self-love as soon as possible, but it is his long-term policy, I fear, to restore to them a new kind of self-love, a charity and gratitude for all selves, including their own. When they have really learned to love their neighbors as themselves, they will be allowed to love themselves as their neighbors. For we must never forget what is the most repellent and inexplicable trait in our enemy. He really loves the hairless bipeds he has created and always gives back to them with his right hand what he has taken away with his left. Reading that quite long paragraph, I was reminded of a section in The Weight of Glory where it talks about, and I'll paraphrase, the fact that you and I have never met a real mortal. Every single person, whether it's the attendant at the 7-Eleven you have to pop in today, whether it's your boss, whether it's someone you will never meet in this lifetime who lives on the other side of the world, whether it's the rich, the poor, the left wing, the right wing, every person you meet is an immortal being. Everyone you meet has that God-given, that God-image potentiality that they might become a true son or daughter of the King of Heaven. So what Lewis is trying to get in front of us is that as we learn to have a proper self-evaluation of ourselves, it actually helps us to turn and to truly love our neighbor. But we cannot love our neighbor if we are deep down hating ourselves. Something I was fascinated by in the midst of that paragraph was this idea of the construction of a cathedral. Did you catch that? The idea that if we are sort of self-removed, if we're just enjoying what God has made us to be, if we built the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, we would be just as delighted having done it in the purposes of God as if someone else had done it. A few years ago, some friends and I got into this lovely thought that what if, in the course of human history, we had listened to the martyr Stephen when he first said, you remember in the book of Acts? He said that God does not live in any man-made place. I've often thought, what would it have been like in the history of the church if we had focused less on the building of those elaborate cathedrals, which, yes, are beautiful, and had individually actually been building up the cathedral of our inner life with the living Jesus? Friends, you were made in his image to build out an endless cathedral of the Spirit. The way that you're going about your day today may be as broad, as high, as deep, as rich as anything that's ever been lived in the presence of God. You are not limited. Again, you are not even mortal. You have been made in his image so that you might show forth to the world his goodness. And it begins right here. Last paragraph of this letter. His whole effort, therefore, will be to get the man's mind off the subject of his own value altogether. He would rather the man thought himself a great architect or a great poet and then forgot about it than that he should spend much time and pains trying to think himself a bad one. Your efforts to instill either vainglory or false modesty into the patient will therefore be met from the enemy's side with the obvious reminder that a man is not usually called upon to have an opinion of his own talents at all, since he can very well go on improving them to the best of his ability without deciding on his own precise niche in the temple of fame. You must try to exclude this reminder from the patient's consciousness at all costs. The enemy, God, will also try to render real in the patient's mind a doctrine which they all profess but find it difficult to bring home to their feelings. The doctrine that they did not create themselves, that their talents were given to them, and that they might as well be proud of the color of their hair. But always, and by all methods, the enemy's aim will be to get the patient's mind off such questions, and yours will be to fix it on them. Even of his sins, the enemy does not want him to think too much. Once they are repented, the sooner the man turns his attention outward, the better the enemy, God, is pleased. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My friend, as you're watching this video and feeling the feelings you're feeling about yourself, because we all do that, we watch everything, we do everything through the lens of our own self-experience. How do you receive your own life? If you're maybe watching this after a day of work, how did you sort of define the course of this day? Was it by your productivity? Was it by the way that people received you, whether they were kind or cruel to you? Was it by this sense you have that you're not quite getting it, like the real purpose of your life, like it's not quite as grand as you hoped it would be? Well, in the spirit of Lewis, in this, the 14th letter of Screwtape, I would remind you that the ability to not take ourselves too terribly seriously, and yet that ability to recognize that what he has given us is for his purposes, our talents, the way that he's placed us in our community, our job, perhaps our particular place we hold in our church fellowship. Every part of our life has been handed to us, just like those three guys in the parable of the talents. Each of us has been given our life for the purpose of expanding the kingdom of heaven. Did today accomplish that task for you? Did the kingdom get just a little bit broader? Did its realm go a little further because you were alive and breathing? Or did you and I, trip up a little bit? Did we get focused on the self? Did we think about our regrets? Did we even actually linger over some sin we committed today in such a way that it took us out of the game for the rest of the day? Friends, the life of Jesus, as always, is our benchmark for the days. How did Jesus conduct himself? Was he stopping every morning to give great thought to his own self-importance? Or was he spending time with the Father to receive his identity and then going out into the day to love all? That's our goal too. To really forget the self, to go out there with a smile on our face and to love, to enjoy, to delight ourselves in the talents, the identity, the true goodness of God that is living inside us by Jesus, and to have the absolute most wonderful day we can have in his presence. When we fall short, we confess it. When we have triumphs, we don't get kind of in our own head about it. We're just grateful to be his, grateful to walk with him. Friends, as always, I want to just tell you, it is a joy to be with you right here on the YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me for another letter in the Screwtape Letters today. I hope that some of these thoughts have maybe even set you free a little bit to enjoy him and to walk with him more deeply. Thanks for joining me on this journey. I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your day.